And welcome back to the Boundary Corner podcast, along with my partners Brian Siegler and Shelton Moss. I am Curtis Wilson, and this episode is brought to you by Dr. Jeremy Counts down at the Main Street Pharmacy in Blacksburg, your friendly neighborhood pharmacy located at 301 South Main Street in Blacksburg. Welcome to Sunday night, boys. We haven't done a Sunday night one in 62 weeks, Brian.
It's been a while, man. It's been a while since we rolled on Sunday night. Not my favorite night, but you know what? We're here. We're doing it. We're gonna put a good episode out there. I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about Syracuse and kind of putting a bow on the first half of the season for the Hokies.
Absolutely. Sheldon, you've been a busy man this weekend, what you told us as we were chatting off air here.
That's right. Been working on the company dime. They've got me performing other duties as assigned.
Other duties as assigned.
You gotta love that caveat, right?
Like,
yeah.
Do you get emailed this, or is it literally a face-to-face telling it something?
No, I got it. It's just the nature of working in sports. Like, you got to work weekends. So,
yeah.
I signed up for the job. I can't, complain about it too much, but hopefully there will be better days ahead.
Absolutely. It will. And, you're able to join us tonight, not on a Tuesday, because there are times where you cannot join us midweek. So it's great to have you here. As y'all can see, we are not a four-pack tonight because our man Tally had to take his daughter for a collegiate visit today and was going to be getting back late this evening. So, again, we get it. Things like this happen to all of us. And
somewhat impromptu, so we had to, make it happen, make it work.
It's life, man.
Yep, that's what it is. I'm happy for him and happy for her that they're getting that opportunity. So
absolutely,
that's what it's all about.
And it's Sunday night. Me and Brian said we'll occasionally snap up because it is essentially sports, the peak sports season right now with collegiate and pro football going on. You got the Dolphins and the Eagles and Game 6, Astros, Rangers.
We're 2 days away from basketball getting going.
Oh my God, it's that time of year.
Yeah, man.
It's great. Like next week is peak sports week. I don't care what anybody says. Next week is peak sports week of the entire year. Argue with me if you want, but it is. World Series will be starting. You're in the midst of right in the middle of the seasons. Things are starting to take shape. College football poll comes out. Or the playoff picture comes out and starts. It's that magical time of year. Plus, it's Halloween.
Oh, yeah.
Halloween. And if we're saying that, let's go ahead and make this announcement. We will be going live next Monday night because ain't no way.
You ain't going to see us on Halloween night, man. You might see me start the show on Monday night, wearing like a, I don't know, screen mask or a hockey mask or some shit.
There you go. Something like that.
We're not going to do it on Halloween.
Absolutely. All right, so tonight, what do we have for y'all? Well, as always, we've got Know the Enemy. We are going to be taking a look at Syracuse Orangemen, some of their players, schemes for the battle in Lane Stadium on Thursday night, which will be, I think, is a 7:30 kick. But before we get into that, we want to do a little midseason grades because it's almost in our bylaws. We have to do a midseason grade. Like, if not the sports podcast host, we might have to be taking a trial because we didn't do one for our team. And similar to some of the questions we had to ask Brent,
it's in the bylaws. They won't even let us put the show out if we don't.
Yeah, they won't. They're like, you can't do it unless you do this episode this week. But we're going to do some midseason grades here, and we're going to look at offense, then defense, and just kind of give where we feel as a team we are. And let's just jump into that. And let's start with, obviously, the most talked about room in Hokie Nation, and that is the quarterback room. And obviously, right now, Kyron Drones is leading the way. We did start out with Grant Wells. And Sheldon, I'm going to start with you. What grade do you give that room for this season so far?
Well, all things considered, I'd say give him a B minus. I think Kyron Jones came in for an injured Grant Wells, did pretty well. I think he's progressed in terms of his understanding of the mental part of the game, making reads in the RPO game, making reads in the throwing game. I think his accuracy has gotten better, his confidence has gotten better. And for a guy that, was kind of a project coming out of high school, first full-time year as a starter, I think there's a lot to like, and I think some of the PFF grades have reflected that he's done pretty well, and still just a redshirt sophomore. So I'm pretty happy with it. I mean, obviously with Wells, you can't really judge based off 1.5 games, but just looking at what Jones has done this year, I think there's a lot of reasons to be very confident about how he's developed. Still just a sophomore.
Brian?
Right there with Shelton, I got a B minus, and pretty much similar reasons. I mean, you kind of discount everything that we saw from Grant Wells. I'm looking at this room primarily on what Drones has done and what Drones has been able to progress throughout the starts that he's had. Looking back, that last series against Purdue, and then kind of how he's progressed as a starting quarterback since then. It's really been good to see him get acclimated in the offense. As Shelton said, get a lot more confidence running the offense. I think that was probably the thing that took a little while to kind of get there, is that he knows he's a gamer, he's a baller, but there are times when you got to rein that in. There's times when you got to unleash that, and kind of getting that feel within the constructs of Tyler Bowen's system, I think, is what took him a little while to kind of get under his feet. But I'm liking what I'm seeing, and it's only probably going to get better from here. So looking forward to see what he can do in the back half here.
See, I'm not that far behind y'all, but I take into the account everything that happened. I'm at like a C plus. Right there on that edge. And here's why. Because, again, the mistake was made to start Grant Wells to begin the season. You let Drones start against ODU and Purdue, against probably the two worst defensive teams we've seen all year. How much better are we today? So I give him an A minus. In my opinion, Drones is an A minus by himself. The Wells stuff and how that was handled up to this point put me just slightly above average. But to what y'all both said, the maturation of Kyron is impressive, because he had to come in. Don't you wish we would have went Rutgers, Marshall, then Purdue, Old Dominion? Wouldn't it that? But because he comes in against a 6-2 bowl eligible Rutgers team and a very good defense in Marshall. That's what he has to come out the gate against. And you saw him, he took his lumps, he took his things, and now you're starting to see him get and improve more and more with the film. So I'm at a C plus, right at a C in that room. I'm going to flip to the running back room next. And even though the stats aren't there, based on everything that's going on in front of them and everything that's happened, I think the way primarily Malachi Thomas, and big shout out to Bashal Tuden, give me a B plus for that room. They are breaking tackles. They are making positive yards. And ever since the switch to Drones, every week we're going up in the offensive rushing categories. Every week, I want to say we're averaging now like 178 since Kyron has become the quarterback. That's one of those things. If you take a look at the numbers out there, 178 puts you in the top 50 roughly. If you tell me we're a top 50 rushing teams, I don't think we lose the Purdue game. I think the Rutgers game is a lot more of a battle at that point. What say you, Shelton?
Yeah, I go B plus. I mean, I think obviously Bashal Tune's been awesome. He's forced a ton of missed tackles. I was trying to look up the numbers, but a lot of missed tackles obviously means your O line and is not necessarily doing the job that you want them to be. Ideally, you'd like to have more breakaway carries. But regardless, he's brought a lot of explosiveness to that room. I think Thomas is a guy that kind of struggled out of the gate, but he did have a really good game against Wake Forest. So put those two together, I'm pretty pleased with that. It's obviously with running backs, it's hard to judge because so much of their success is dependent on other people, not just the O-line, but also the passing game too. But if you just try to isolate them individually, I think they've done very well.
Yeah, I'm not too far behind you, Sheldon. I've got a B for this group. I think overall, if Thomas had been putting his output similar to what we've seen from Tuden, in games other than probably the last 2 weeks, I'd probably have them right at a B plus or a B. But with him having a little bit of trouble getting going, that kind of brought it down to just a B for me. But I think that looking at Tuten, he's really a dynamic player coming out of the backfield. We've seen what he can do, catching the ball, making guys miss, breaking tackles. I like the way he finishes his runs. So seeing that out of that room, if we can just get marginally better offensive line play, I think that room could really break out. But they're starting to kind of turn a corner a little bit, especially now with drones in the game as well, giving them a little bit more space to operate.
Yep, and y'all both mentioned Malachi Thomas. Malachi over his last couple of games, averaging just under 6 yards a carry. That is really nice as a complimentary back to what we know Tootin can do. All right, let's flip over to the skill positions and let's talk about the wide receiver and the tight ends. Brian, you lead me with this one. Where do you feel this room is at?
I got them at an A-. Probably the best overall grade that I'm going to give on the whole team. I think the wide receiver output, especially considering that Ollie Jennings has went down, that room has really performed well overall. And, looking at the tight ends, I think it's kind of up and down. We also had an injury there. So there's been some, and other guys have been nicked up as we went along. So it's been a couple big injuries in those rooms, but they've still taken it in stride and really have kind of elevated the offensive play as kind of we've gone along through the season. So excited about that room and excited to see what they can do down the stretch.
What about you, Sheldon? What about the wideout room and any scores, any PFF grades that jump out to you?
No, I mean, honestly, for this one, I think we don't even need to look at the grades really. You can kind of just see the added explosiveness. I mean, I think Jalen Lane presents a yak yards after catch / speed element that Tech has been lacking for quite a few seasons, even during some of the Fuente years where they had some good wide receivers. And obviously, Allie Jennings beyond hurts a lot because he's going to be a big time player. I think Felton's been a little bit up and down. Would have liked to see more production from him. But you're not going to get everybody the ball with a more of a run heavy offense. So I think they've done a pretty good job, and I think the blocking for the most part has been pretty good too. Like that's something that I know that Coach Mines is big on the details. You look at the Pitt game, they run the ball outside constantly, and
Yep.
those plays don't work unless you get good perimeter blocking. So I think the biggest encouraging thing for me is the fact that our perimeter blocking is much more up to par than it has been in recent seasons.
Yep. And I'm with Brian on this one and both of y'all. This room, like you said, we really probably didn't even need to talk about it, but it's still fun too, because I've got this one rated at an A, and you kind of look up and down. And you talk about guys being up and down, Shelton, but the up and down is for a good reason because there are so many guys to distribute the ball to. Daquan Felton just the other day had like 3 catches for 19, 20 yards. A couple of them were stick movers. Very important. But Stephen Gosnell lit it up along with Jay Lane last week. They all have their niche roles. Yes, you have Felton who can take it off the top, Lane who can make people miss in space, Gosnell who's great at finding those zones. And then the 2 young tight ends with Gosnell and Wright, those guys, have a combined 25 catches, 327 yards. They're averaging over 10 a catch. They're averaging over 10, actually over 12 a catch. And when you have all that on the field, are there going to be games where they get 1 catch? Yes, but that catch may be a huge play. I go back to last week's game and that wheel route that was caught by Daquan right down on the sideline. How big a play that was, it moved us right to the other side of the field. And like I said, with Felton catching a few first downs. So everybody's playing a role there. And that's what we did not have last year. We had 1 guy last year who was effectively able to do that, and now we have multiple at different levels. All righty. Let's go to the offensive line. Brian, hold your tongue. You're going last on this one. But Shelton, sorry, man. Sorry, you're gonna blow us with some stuff. Shelton, what is your grade on the offensive line and your justifications behind it?
Look, I gotta go D+. I mean, I'm sorry, but it's been rough. I mean, there's ways with the advanced stats we have now to isolate offensive line play from running back play. So obviously, when you look at yards per rush, that's colored by quarterback scrambles, quarterback runs, design runs, and obviously running backs breaking up big plays.
Yeah.
But when you look at things like line yards per carry, for most of the season, Tech was absolutely one of the worst in the country, one of the worst in Power 5, certainly. Now, it has gotten better over the past couple of weeks. I think last time I checked, they were somewhere around like 107 out of 133, something like that. It was like below 125 for some time. So it's just been rough, man. And like I watch the games on tape. You can see it on film. It's just there. It's part of it. I think it's physicality, but also part of it's just missed assignments. And I don't know what the corrections are. Obviously, they've got to tweak the roster once the offseason comes around. But we could get into all the reasons why the personnel is the way it is, but I don't think the issues are correctable, and I got to go D plus. I'm sorry, it's just been that bad.
All right. I am a slight, just 1+ below you. I'm at a D for that line. It could be lower. It could be almost a failure, but I will say this. Of that line, the one thing that has kind of been a slight bright spot is seeing 3 guys who have a FR next to their name have some of the higher scores. You shared with us last week, Xavier Chaplin scored unbelievable in all aspects against Wake Forest. Braylon Moore scored very well. Caden Moore, which we should do an episode just Brian discussing the center position and the difficulty and why a bad grade to have there, and then seeing Brody Meadows come on. Those guys have been bright spots. They're freshmen, so when you see missed assignments and stuff like that, obviously y'all know where we feel about the other guys and how we've discussed it. But it has been below average, and to be 3-4 and the running game slowly getting going, not having that good of an offensive line, is something. But it's also what you just said, Shelton. Things have to be done in the off season, and it'll be interesting to see that. Now, Brian,
My turn.
your turn.
D-.
How low of a D- on a scale of 0 to 100?
So when I was first, my instinct was to give it an F, and then I was like, no. And it's because of what you just said, Curtis. It's because we've got guys with freshmen next to their name that are showing some potential, that are showing some bright spots, that are starting to put things together a little bit on the offensive line, that shows that Crook is getting something out of them. We're making some progress on that front. But I'm also with Shelton. I don't think that what's there is good. I think we're kind of getting as much juice out of them at this point as I think we're going to get out of them the rest of the season. I don't know if you're going to see necessarily the steps that we've seen from those freshmen going forward. It's going to be more like those little tick up here, tick up there, but you're still looking at a right side that's pretty atrocious, and that's not really going anywhere, it seems. So,
all right, last question: if there is a change on the offensive line, do we see it Thursday?
I think if you're going to see if they're going to make a switch that's going to be a full-time switch, that's when you would see it in terms of the depth chart. So I guess we'll find out Tuesday when the depth chart comes out, if any adjustments have been made there. But barring that, I don't see us making a significant leap going forward. I think it's it might get into Shelton's range where I'd give it a D+, but I don't think we're really going up a letter grade here.
Brian says no letter grade up. We'll see. I'm sure we'll do something similar to this in a few weeks here and see how it feels. All right, let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. And let's start with the defensive line. So, Siegler, I'll get you the floor on this one. How you feel about the defensive line so far?
I'm giving a B-. I think we've seen some really bright spots, especially from Antoine Powell-Ryland. He's getting up there in sacks in the nation. We've seen him be able to impact the plays even when he's not getting to the quarterback, just with that speed and people having to identify him pre-snap. I think the interior guys have been kind of up and down, but I like seeing Fladarius Payne really come into his own and really become an impact player on that defensive line. That's somebody we were hoping at the start of the season we would just get something out of in that rotation. And he's really kind of been, in my opinion, one of the best players on the defensive line, especially now that he's getting enough reps to kind of show that. So those are kind of the bright spots there. I think there were some problems along there where they weren't giving enough to kind of help some of the other deficiencies we have in that running game. So that's probably where I'm knocking them down a little bit. But I think overall they've played pretty well so far this year.
Sheldon, what about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna give a solid C+. Again, I'm grading on a curve. You got a bunch of seniors on that D line, and if they were freshmen, I might be more charitable. But I just think to be honest. They don't have the dudes. I mean, the interior guys have been kind of pushed around a little bit. I just, when you look at guys like Kendricks and Pollard, yeah, they've done okay, but they just don't live in the backfield. Like they're not, eating up space and getting to the QB, and stuffing those run lanes. Obviously, defensive ends have been pretty good. I think Feldarius Payne has been awesome. APR has been really good. Both those guys have generated lots of pass QB pressures. So a kind of a hit or miss type of situation where you got a lot of production from your Ds, but not so much from the DTs. I think overall it's been pretty average, and we know that the rushing grades aren't very good. But again, part of that gets back to the linebackers, which obviously we'll discuss very shortly.
We will discuss them very shortly. I'm actually going higher than both of y'all. Shelton, you're a full letter grade below me. I think I'm going B plus. Because the middle, it's done what I expected. The interior has done what I expected. They have not really significantly fallen off the cliff. They've played good at times. Payne has been the bright spot there. But really, the edge guys have really stepped it up, like y'all mentioned with APR. And you're seeing McCray play solid. You're seeing those guys play solid and contribute. And they are younger guys. Again, I think maybe my curve was I know what I'm going to get out of this group. So as long as they get what I expect and these outside guys do better, I'm going to be a little bit more lenient. And that's what I won on this one. And hey, somebody's with me. B plus on that. All right, Shelton, since you brought it up, I'll let you lead right into it. Where's your grade on the linebacker room?
Yeah, I'm going D minus. I mean,
Woo!
I just don't know what very little redeeming qualities with this group. Look, they played better against Wake Forest. That's no doubt about that. But for the most part, I mean, it's just been horrible. I mean, we are again one of the bottom 10 percentile in pretty much all the rushing stats. And when you look at the number of explosive plays, it's pretty clear that the linebackers are the problem because in terms of success rate, I think Tech is more kind of middle of the pack. So they're getting some stops. It's just that when those running backs get to the second level, when they do have a successful play, it tends to be really successful. It tends to be a big play. So that's an indication that your second level guys aren't getting the job done. And between Alan Tisdale, who struggled, and Kelly Lawson, who's had his moments, I just have a hard time looking at this group and seeing what they've done well.
I'm just average because I think where a lot of those bad grades you see come at, it's when people who are not seeing the field anymore were there. And we saw that numerous times in numerous games. I'm not saying Lawson and the rest of them are like blowing it out the water, but to me, I kind of look at this and say, here's the really bad part. If I add all this, I'm probably a D plus. C minus, low. But then what I saw happen, though, was the decision was made right. There are certain guys we have not seen on the field at the linebacker spot in weeks.
At least not as much.
Not as hardly any. And when I see that, it's like if I take a look at the snapshot of who's now playing significant reps, it's a C. Shelton, if you want me to do the whole thing, give me a C minus. What's the grading scale? It would be a 70 on the number if you ask me to look at it as a whole. But for the guys who are significantly getting the reps now, I give them more of that mid C grade. Brian?
Yeah, I'm a C minus. Just bad run fits for weeks and weeks. Really the Wake Forest game is the only game I think you can point to and say they did a really good job both consistently and with stopping the explosive plays, because we still had some explosive play against Pitt, even though we more or less held them in check. It's been inconsistent in the run game. I mean, if you told me just to grade how they've held up against the pass, I mean, pretty well overall. I mean, we haven't been thrown on much, mainly because they can run the ball against us fairly well, but if we continue to see the type of play we've seen kind of, I'd say even the last 3 weeks going forward, I mean, this grade could maybe get up to a C plus. I don't see it again similar to what I said with the offensive line. I don't know if this necessarily gets a full letter grade jump. But now, if we see what we saw against Wake the rest of the season, then yeah, I can see a full letter grade jump. But I think the last 3 weeks on a whole is more indicative of what they are capable of. I think the first few weeks was probably bottom of the barrel, and I think it was some of that adjustment of, all right, well, this guy has some ability here, but he's not doing the right thing consistently, so we got to get him out of the game.
You've got to pull the guys out. They have ability, and that's kind of the way it is. Again, I think that's how we look at things. It would be really interesting to see at the end of the season, and I think this would go for every group, would be pull it out and look at snap counts, starting at ODU in a chart like by the end of the season where guys are. Who started getting more reps, who lost their reps, and then seeing how that overall play is, especially in the linebacker room. All right, we're going to look at the safety room next. And I'm going C-, and this was my 70. It almost was a D+, because the safety room was struggling for a while there. And that's what happens when you have a guy who's converted from the offense in the offseason and you have a true freshman playing. Nasir Peoples, although Nasir is a good player, Nasir was the ship that steadied everything back there. Jalen Stroman's a great player. I have no doubts about that. But when the next two guys were young, that inexperienced, or you're rotating Canteen or Delane in, it really hurt that room a lot. And that's why, thankfully, Peoples got over that injury and he's back. Because if he hadn't been back the last few weeks, this would have been a D+ grade for me. But with him back and kind of steadying the ship back there, both in pass and run coverage, give me a C-. Brian?
We said at the start of the year that depth was a big concern at the safety position. And
we did.
That played out like a motherfucker for about the first month. That's what happened. I mean, we ended up having a converted wide receiver and a true freshman as our primary safeties for large chunks of time in about 3 or 4 games.
Yep.
That's not what you want. And I'm not taking anything away from Jalen or Mose, but sometimes you're just not quite ready for that type of responsibility that early in your career and that early in your transition to a new position. I think they are players that at this point are fine for series at a time here or there, maybe even a quarter at a time here or there, but they're not ready to hold up for 4 quarters like that. And when you have that coupled with inconsistent linebacker play, coupled with an interior defensive line that kind of can get moved around a little bit, that's a recipe for big plays. And that's what we saw. And, we can kind of stack it level by level here, but the safety, I mean, there's a reason it's called a safety, right? So
that's true.
At some point, they've got to make the play that stops the touchdown.
How about you, Sheldon?
Yeah, I'll go see. I mean, kind of what you were talking about with the linebackers, Curtis. This isn't a situation where obviously the personnel on the field is not what the coaches wanted coming into the season. You got guys like Mose Phillips playing meaningful snaps. Jalen Jones and Caleb Woodson are the 2 worst graded safeties in the ACC. It's just been a constant revolving door, so it's kind of hard to judge. Obviously, like you mentioned, losing Peoples was big. Stroman's been good. I think the guys that, when you look at the guys that they expected to start this season, the guys that they wanted in there, I think they've done pretty well. It's just been a constant revolving door. So again, I give them a C grade, but it's with the context that they just have not had any sort of continuity there.
Yep, and hopefully with Peoples finally coming back, like I said, steady the ship to what Brian touche.
Yes, all of the above. All of the above.
Love that one. All right, let's flip it one more room as we wrap up this segment, and let's talk about the cornerback room, Brian. I'll let you lead with this one.
I'm going to go a very solid B+. So this is an 89 if we're on the 10-point scale.
Okay.
Here. This is an 89. I like what I've seen from the cornerbacks. Delane has been as advertised. Strong probably coming back and having his best year since his freshman campaign. I've liked what I've seen from Canteen, especially him being able to get some turnovers in there. That's been big for this defense. So Those guys have held up, and I've liked what I've seen from the true freshmen that have gotten some run at that position. So it's really been a good overall performance. The only knock I'm going to give is that they haven't been tested a ton this year, so I don't know how good they truly are. So that's kind of why I'm holding back from putting an A grade on them yet. But overall, I like what I've seen, so I'm going to give them a B plus.
Sheldon, what about you?
Yeah, I'll go B. I think Canteen's been a good depth add. He's graded out really well in terms of run defense. Strong has been fantastic in coverage all season long. I think overall, like you said, they haven't been testing much, so I think that's kind of where some stats can be misleading in terms of the pass yards per game allowed. Yards per attempt, it's still good. Not as good, but still pretty good. So I think given, what they've gone through this season with in terms of just, the safety rotations and some guys playing out of position, I'm sure it's affected them to some degree because obviously when you have younger players in there, it's harder to trust that they're all playing their assignments. So that can hamper your effectiveness sometimes. But I think all things considered, they've done very well. So I'll give them a B.
Yep. This was my highest graded group on the defense, an A minus. It's the 90 to 91. Just because it's kind of what you said there about the young guys have looked solid. They've been, and it's primarily because they played them at the right amount, right? The right amount of snaps, the right times, the right sort of coverages. They haven't been thrown into anything big. And to me, the other four guys are as advertised. You mentioned Canteen. When Canteen was brought in, it was nickel. He's coming here to play nickel. He can help us with the other spots in the rotation, but he's coming here to play nickel. And Sheldon, when you talk about his run defense grade, it makes sense. And he's definitely making making himself probably some money at the next level with how he's playing that position and then showing the flexibility to play on the outside. So I'm going to throw this up real quick just because, Andretti, you're back. We missed you last week. Tally is currently with his daughter, y'all, doing a little collegiate tour, so he could not make it tonight, sort of something that came up last minute. But, again, we get it.
Yeah, so before we move on, Curtis, let me make another note here. Imagine how good some of these grades could be if you didn't have Cantain and Delane rotating at safety for part of these large stretches of time, those 2 to 3 games that we were talking about earlier. So, those grades could potentially be higher for those players that they weren't having to take on those type of roles, out of necessity because of injuries and targeting and everything else.
Yep. It's very true. It's a lot took it out. Again, that back half has played well, even with everything that it's had to do. It's also give a testament and a shout out to Coach Jones and Coach Prelude for having to wrap those up. There'd be some people disagree with you there, Jim. That's why I send a couple buddies, watch the game, listen to us.
Hey man, we're still here.
I'm still watching.
I got the game on right above me, so I need Tua and Waddle to get some action going here because I need some points in my fantasy leagues.
Well, I'm losing one league, and we're not going to do it. Let me ask this, and if y'all are listening out there, we got a bunch of people watching tonight. All right, what's the one group between now and the week after Thanksgiving y'all are saying that group's going to definitely improve, and one you want to well, never mind. I think the one we all want to improve is the offensive line could improve. Can I put that motion on the table? Everybody wants the offensive line to do
Everyone
better.
wants to see the offensive line get better, yeah.
Motion pass. But what's the group you think will improve, Shelton, between now and the end of the season, based in your eyes?
In my eyes, I would say probably linebackers. I mean, I thought they were good against Wake Forest. I trust Pry's instincts. I trust Marv's instincts, given the specialty they have with those groups. And I would say I do think that it's more explainable given the youth in that room why they've struggled so much. I think given the way the defensive line has played okay in the run game, the corners have been good. The safeties, now that they're healthy, we think will be good. I think the linebacker crew is that one missing component. So if they get their act together, I think the defense can really take a big step forward.
Brian, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at the group I'd like to see improve the most, I'm with Sheldon. It's got to be the linebacker group. Because if the linebacker group can improve and we stay healthy in the secondary at the safety position, I feel like the running game, the run defense can be serviceable, good enough, not allow those big, huge explosive plays, because outside of the explosive plays, we've held up fairly well against the run. It's really just been those really big gashers that have, really changed the tide in a lot of games in the running game and kind of really put those lopsided numbers in the stat sheets there. If we can improve that linebacker position, one full grade, get it up to I had a C minus. Let's get that thing up to a B minus. I think we could be onto something there. So if they found a consistent rotation and these guys continue to take steps forward in their play, I think that would be big.
All right. I'm going to go different than both y'all completely, and I think it's the quarterback, because I think if we continue to see the maturation of Kyron Drones between these last 5 games and the end of the season, it could be something special because of the steps he's taken between the end of that Purdue game and what he did against Wake Forest. How quick it was, how quick he has moved, especially the 350 last week. That's who I think could take a step, because you're seeing it quicker. And people can say, well, they're getting more tape on him. They had a lot of tape on him going into those last 3 games. Like you had the Marshall tape and you had the Rutgers tape. Usually it's just a couple ones. I like that one, though. I like that one. Yeah. The tight end room. Good call out there, Derek. So definitely feed those into us. We want to see what you guys think about that. And we are now going to move on to Know the Enemy. But before we do that, we are going to take a quick pause from our digital partners and Main Street Pharmacy.
I can probably save you a lot of money, and I can take a lot better care of you. That's pretty much it. My name is Jeremy Counts, and I'm a pharmacist. I own and operate Main Street Pharmacy here in downtown Blacksburg. My brother's a pharmacist, I'm a pharmacist, my uncle's a pharmacist, my dad's a pharmacist. I remember he would give me M&Ms to count in little pill counters. This is just something I've always done, and I'm just lucky that what I know so well is something that I can do and feel good about it and give back to people. Pharmacies are your frontline defense. Pharmacy's job is to make sure you're getting optimal care for the lowest price possible. Also, we take the pressure off of emergency rooms. I'll tell people immediately when they need to go to the doctor, or I'll tell them if they just need a cream over the counter. If there's something that isn't commercially available, if it's something that's not available in a certain strength or a certain form or anything like that, we'll make it. Tailor-made medications. Some of those options save people a lot of money. What motivates me? I get to take care of people and live in Blacksburg. That's all I need.
As we take a quick break, we'd like to tell you about getting your free website report from our digital partner, Grassroots Digital Marketing Studio. They'll tell you how your website ranks on Google, on-site SEO, and social media. No commitment to buy anything. You can get your free report by visiting grassrootsdigitalstudio.com/free-website-report. Now back to the episode.
All righty. So let's hit it up here and let's talk about Know the Enemy, and let's talk about the Syracuse Orangemen. Shelton, you were mentioning some stuff, and since before we get into specific sides, Sheldon had some stuff just on Syracuse in general that he wanted to hit up before we get into the deep dive. So go ahead, Sheldon.
Yeah, it's been a pretty weird year for them because they started out really hot in the non-conference play, being up on some lower competition, but the results look pretty good. Since they've started conference play, though, they have just absolutely fallen off a cliff. I mean, it's kind of hard to really wrap your head around. I saw a stat on Twitter from Bill Connolly. So he does he looks at the biggest overachievers and the biggest underachievers based on, performance relative to expected points. And he weights recent games more. So it kind of looks at what you're doing recently. And he had Syracuse as the second biggest underachiever in the country. So they have just, kind of fallen apart these past, 3-4 games. And it's been kind of apropos of Babers' career there. He's just been really up and down as a coach. He had that one great season in 2018 with 10 wins. And then 2 years later, he goes 1-10. And now they've been kind of, bouncing around 500. So I know that, Syracuse is a really hard place to win. But I think this might be a pretty critical stretch for them coming up, because if you tank this season with Garrett Schrader as your quarterback, there might be some fans calling for heads. So this is a big stretch coming up for Syracuse. So I think they're going to come to this game pretty motivated.
You good, Curtis?
Yeah, I'm good. Just hearing some noises out here, making sure everything's okay. Yeah, and you know what? I was listening to the Locked On Sports Syracuse. They have one of those, and that guy was mentioning something similar, Sheldon, similar to what you talked about how he's only had one good season. Is this it? Is this 5 game stretch starting with the Hokies on Thursday night? If he doesn't effectively have a good turnaround between now and the end of this season, um, could they let him go? Because there's only one season after this one left, I believe. So it's very interesting to see how it goes. But now let's do flip because, like you said, the more recent results. Let's flip to the offense and talk about the more recent results. Because overall, this team is averaging 28 points a game. That's a solid number. In the last 3 games, the one probably why you were so focused on that Connolly article, they're averaging 8 points in their last 3 games, which are 3 losses to Clemson, to Carolina, and to Florida State. They're a middle of the road team when it comes to yards. And when you're middle of the road when it comes to yards and you look at who they played, and I'm not trying to disparage, we played Purdue as well and lost to them. They played Colgate, Western Michigan, Purdue, and Army. It's not a murderer's row to start 0-4. So now the question is, let's take a look at this offense. And Brian, it's a guy that we definitely as Hokie fans are familiar with, and that's Jason Beck. He was the QB coach down at Virginia from 2016 to 2021. And what are we looking at with his offense, and what can they do?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at the smash mouth spread, heavy zone read, ton of quarterback runs. They have most of their success in the passing game off of play action, off sprint outs, off things where they're getting the quarterback out of the pocket or using some run action to kind of confuse the linebackers and open up some pass lanes for the quarterback. But you're going to see a heavy dose of run, particularly with the quarterback. Expect upwards of 20 carries or more for their quarterback in this offense. We've seen it a lot with UVA. We're going to see it again now with Syracuse. Curtis, we don't have you.
Because I hit the mute button and forgot to unmute it. Welcome to me on Zoom meetings sometimes. Let's talk about Garrett Shader. 6'4", 230. We know all too much about him. Back in 2021, he led the comeback against the Hokies that essentially, in my opinion, that was a game that sealed Justin Fuente's fate.
Yes.
Thank you.
I was there too. It sucked.
It sucked. But, so far this season, 62% passing, 8 touchdowns, 5 picks, but he has ran a ton. He is there. Get it up here. Where did it go? You ever have a number up and then it just goes away? There we go. He has over 350 yards, averaging just over 4.5. Just a little background on him. He was a pretty highly rated guy. Went down to Mississippi State to begin with in 2019. Was a top 250 player, top 10 dual threat quarterback, low 4-star to 91. Had offers from a lot of different places all over the country. And Brian, this is what, second? You've watched a lot of film on Garrett Shader in the last few years.
Inadvertently, yeah. It just seems like anytime half the time if I'm watching tape on other teams, it's like, all right, the last game was Syracuse. All right, the last game was what the fuck? All right, so I get to see Garrett Shader again. I'd say overall he's an average thrower of the football. He's not going to wow you, but he's also doesn't really have a ton of weaknesses either. Not the most accurate thrower, but he can get the ball downfield and hurt you that way. Throws best in the short and intermediate game when you roll the pocket, get him moving, get him where he can kind of throw in those open lanes to one side, that kind of 1 or 2 read type look. He's patient when he runs the football. I think that's the big thing about him, why he's able to sometimes break those big plays, is because he is patient when he breaks the pocket, even though it's a design runner, even though he knows he's going to scramble right away. He still lets the blocks kind of happen so he can kind of get the most out of those rushes. And he has really good acceleration, so he's got that ability to kind of bust a big play when he does get to that second and third level of the defense.
All right, Sheldon, you had a couple additional points on him, and the one thing I asked you to look up was how he performs in their wins and how he performed in their losses so far this year.
Yeah, it's pretty stark contrast. So PFF rate about 52 in their losses, and it's around 80 in their wins. So a few interesting notes on Schrader. Uh, Overall, pretty much middle of the road quarterback, like Brian was saying. Not a ton of stats that stand out too much. Syracuse tends to throw pretty deep, so our average depth of target ranks 26 among Power Five quarterbacks. On the flip side, though, he does make a lot of turnover where he plays, so that's kind of the side effect there. He has been sacked a lot, and his passer rating is 48, so kind of right next to Kyron Jones. Lots of deep throws in this offense. Not particularly efficient throwing behind the line of scrimmage, although they don't do it a ton. The biggest thing I got out of this, and this is what Brian alluded to, play action. Syracuse is a completely different team when they run play action. So when running play action, they complete about 80% of the passes. When they're not running play action, they complete about 55%. So that plus 25 point differential is the second biggest in the Power Five. So that's one thing they got to be watching out for is the PA throws. I would say, overall, he does get pressured a lot, and according to some of the PFF numbers, he shares a high degree of responsibility for those pressures. So some of it's on the offensive line, some of it's on him, kind of a little bit of both. But he scrambles a lot, as I'll cite a stat in a coming second. So definitely have to be aware of the run threat with Schrader.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one thing you do have to watch out for him. We've seen it already one time in the last few years. I don't want to flip next to probably, in my opinion, just looking stat wise, definitely their best run of the ball. And that's LaQuint Allen, 195 pounds, 6 foot, from Millville, New Jersey, and Millville High School. And, solid prospect coming out, 85, had your Pitt offer, Rutgers offers, had a UVA offer, was a top 25 player in the state of New Jersey. So a solid state, solid ranking there. And so far this year, and he is a a true sophomore because he did play last year. Just under 5 a game with 7 touchdowns running the ball. Brian, what else did the tape say?
Yeah, I mean, looking at him run the ball, he's pretty solid between the tackles, but he's really more dangerous when he can get on the edge, use his speed to kind of get some extra yards there. He also really likes to work those cutback lanes on those read options. You'll see him bend it back, and that's when he can break off some of those bigger runs as well. They will get him involved in the passing game, mostly on swings and checkdowns. They're not running a ton of behind the line of scrimmage type stuff, but he's proficient in that as well. Catches good with his hands and can make people miss in space.
Shelton, what additional info you have on him for tonight?
Right around 5 yards per carry. His explosive plays are pretty solid. He's got 7 design carries of 15 or more yards. Like Brian was saying, very heavily targeted in the passing game. One of the most heavily targeted running backs in all Power 5 with 25 passing targets.
Yep, 25 passing targets, 23 receptions, and 157 yards. So, it's good to see, Brian, as you broke down that tape there, that it's not necessarily route trees, it's checkdowns. But that also, it makes our linebacker room and our safeties have to pay attention to him on those outsides when he goes out for routes, even though they're not going to be complex as part of the offense. You still have to respect him because a 92%, catch percentage on 25 targets, that's pretty damn good for a running back, in my opinion.
And occasionally those are, ones where it looks like he's staying in the block and then he's kind of leaking out. And, that's one where you look like you're about to get home, you look like you're about to get a stop, and all of a sudden he dumps it down to a running back and you give up an 8-yard gain on, 3rd and 6. So that's the ones you got to be careful of.
All righty. Let's flip and talk to who the ball may be thrown to this week. And that's going to be Umari Hatch. Now, we're mentioning Hatch, but I want to mention another name real quick, and that is Arando Gatson. Arando Gatson was going to be probably their big playmaker this year. He's like a 6'5", 220-pound, a big player. They lost him very early in the season. So know that they don't probably have their best weapon out there, and that's why we're looking at Hatch. Of course, there's always got to be a Virginia kid on these teams, right? Mari Hatch, Freedom High School in Woodbridge. He was a top 20 player in the state of Virginia back in the class of 2021. He was the 20th ranked player. And, so far having a good season, 346 yards. I don't have the reception numbers in front of me. He is their leading guy. And, Brian, what are you seeing on the tape? What does he do for them?
Yeah, what he's doing most, he usually lines up to the right hand side of the formation, but he's their biggest deep threat that they use on the team. He's targeted a lot down the field. He's the guy that they want to get involved when Schrader is throwing the ball deep down the field for this offense. Targeted mostly on goes, fades. They'll use him up the seam occasionally, but they will also use him on some crossers and digs as well to get that kind of intermediate routes in there as well. He's really their guy that's going to get that those big yards down the field. So he's the one that we got to make sure is not a game breaker on Thursday.
All right, Sean, you said you did have one little note on Mari Hatcher, not Umari Hatch. My apologies there.
Yeah, only note is that he is targeted on a whole lot of deep balls. So 13th in the Power 5 and average depth of target about 17 yards per catch. So, he's going to be in a lot of deep balls. Also, you mentioned he's from Virginia. It seems to me like there's been a lot of under the radar guys from this state that have gone on to play for other, low level Power 5 programs, especially in the Northeast. I know Rutgers had safety or running back from Virginia that we played them a few weeks ago. I can't remember the name, but it's a state that I think is good at producing underrated talent, but the high rated talent leaves a little bit to be desired. But that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, we talked about a few players from Pitt.
February.
I think we had 2 or 3 from Wake last week.
It was like 5 for Wake. It was not like 2 or 3. It was literally but they did get Devin Claiborne, who's a pretty highly rated guy. He is on that team, and he obviously ran the kickback. So, But again, that is another story. That's February. We'll write it down. We'll circle the episode. We'll talk about kind of the wrap of recruiting and then do some breakdowns on that. But there's still talent here, and that's where. Again, I think I'm gonna try to keep it in because we got one more piece on the offensive line is offering somebody like a Hatch who goes to Freedom. Freedom is a good fucking football school. Good football school.
Yeah, and let's talk about what is Pride been having to rebuild in the last year and a half or so that wasn't that great under the previous regime. And we're at a time right now where guys that were recruited in that time frame when things kind of fell off the map are becoming solid either rotational pieces or starters at these other universities. So that's why you see Pitt with like 2 or 3 starters and Wake with 5 starters that are key players on their team that were kind of that mid to high 3, occasionally a low 4 player that is now playing for another ACC school. So, we're still kind of in the midst of experiencing that. I think we're probably got 1 or 2 more years where that's going to be a topic of conversation throughout ACC play.
I'm going to say this before we hit the offensive line. I think that's always going to be a conversation because as you start filling out your rooms, you're trying to find fits, and there's guys that may not get an offer. They may not recruit as hard because of this is not quite what we need for this position. He's a good player, but if he comes here, it's going to be a tough hill to climb. But now let's talk about the offensive line. Shelton, while you were mentioning how bad their offensive line was, I had to look it up, and I found it. They are 100th in the country at sacks allowed, 19 over the first 7 games. Now, where they do differ between the other guys down there, they are under 100 sack yards per game. So real quick, before Brian breaks down the tape, Shelton, did you get a chance to pull up their grades on the offensive line?
I did, yes. And it's interesting. There seems to be a discrepancy in terms of the sack totals you mentioned and their overall pass blocking PFF grades. So they're actually graded pretty well in pass blocking, 17th as a team. They just don't really have a ton of, individual standouts on that offensive line. Nobody graded in the top 40 in the ACC in terms of offensive linemen. Their left tackle, Enrique Cruz, is the worst graded run blocker in the ACC. and their rushing yardage numbers are okay overall, but that's mainly because of Schrader's running ability. So Schrader is averaging about 6.3 yards per rushing attempt. You take out the sacks, and he also leads the ACC in scramble yards. So kind of apropos of what I was mentioning earlier, he scrambles a lot. He can get out of the pocket. So even if the offensive line doesn't give a ton of time to throw, he can make plays happen with his feet.
So, Brian, you watched the tape, and I know Sheldon said the grade doesn't reflect it, but the stats numbers reflect it. What did the tapes reflect about their pass pro?
It's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, they give up some sacks that they probably shouldn't. Occasionally, Schrader hangs around back there too much or tries to escape the pocket too soon and kind of gets himself into trouble. So there's a little bit of that in there as well. I mean, I'd call them probably very average in pass pro and very average run blocking overall. There's not really standouts, as Shelton said, really across the board. It's just a fairly solid pass pro and then a run game that when they can get going, especially with Schrader, looks probably a little bit better than it really is in terms of the actual blocking.
Alrighty. Glad to hear some of the stuff is correlating between the numbers and the actual taking a look at the tape itself. You said the left tackle is their worst run blocker. Who's their best graded? Just one of those things to be paying attention to Thursday night.
Yeah, I'll look it up in one quick sec. I'll have it for you.
Yeah, because again, while we're doing this, because we hear that, I'm sure, Brian, your first thought is, well, if he sucks that bad, then they're probably not going to be running to the left much. So probably you're not going to be looking at outside zone. There's probably maybe an inside zone to the left side. It's probably going to be elsewhere on the line.
Yeah, so their best graded run blocker is Christopher Blake. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. He is their left guard. So he's played pretty much the whole season.
All right. So there you go. Probably it'll be interesting to see where they run the ball Saturday night. All right, let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball, and let's talk about this defense led by Rocky Long. If you don't know the name Rocky Long, then you probably really haven't been paying attention to college football the last 20 years. Rocky Long, successful in New Mexico back in the late 90s, early 2000s, became San Diego State's defensive coordinator in 2009 and coached there for right at a decade where he had some significant success with San Diego State. Brian, tell me some other stuff about Rocky Long and the defense he runs.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the godfathers of the 3-3 stack. So along with his mentor, Joe Lee Dunn, think about those Memphis teams back in the day. This is kind of one of the originators of the 3-3-5. But I will say, looking at their alignment, they will kind of switch up the front to confuse the offensive line. You'll occasionally see them go with like a 2-4-5 look. Sometimes in nickel, sometimes just to kind of confuse things there and show a different look. Like most 3-3 stacks, very stunt blitz heavy. So you expect that from the D. It's going to be a handful for the offensive line to handle some of that. So hopefully that they are ready and more prepared than we were at the beginning of the season for these type of fronts. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be another one of those where we've got to make sure that we keep Kyron Drones off his back as well, because they, again, will bring some pressure there in the backfield.
All right. Well, let's take a look at a couple of the key players there at Syracuse. And let's start with the Rover, Justin Barron, number 8, defensive back, 6'4", 230 pounds from Suffolk Academy in Rock Hill, Connecticut. Came out, was an 84 at 247, top 15 player in the state of Connecticut, a top 100 athlete when he came out. I think he was looked at as a wide receiver and then moved effectively, then inside linebacker, then eventually Rover. And so far this year, tackle-wise, leading the team, 55 tackles, 5 tackles for loss. Where I really found it interesting was 4 pass deflections along with 2 forced fumbles. So obviously that guy's around the ball a lot. Brian, what's the tape telling you about Justin Barron?
Yeah, I mean, he's a big asset in their run support. He's the guy that's primarily coming up from the safety position, making good plays, good fits, and making a solid tackle in the run game. Overall, really good with fits, really good in pursuit. I'd say he's much better in zone coverage than he is in man. He's kind of a little slow changing directions in man coverage, so that may be a spot where we can kind of take advantage.
All righty. Sheldon, any sort of deeper metrics on Justin Barron, the Rover, for the Orangeman?
Yeah, overall pretty good in coverage. 62 passer rating when targeted, which is pretty solid. He does have a pretty shallow depth of target, so only about 4 yards is his depth when he's targeted in pass coverage. Not surprising because he mostly plays in the box. And as a result of that, he also has 8 run stops, which is a stat that PFF tracks. Basically, a loss for the offense, which is tied for third in ACC at his position group.
Very nice to know. So, like you said, I think when I hear that and I hear Brian talking about man, he's not going to be going with guys like Wright or Gosnell up the seam or on wheel routes. He's going to be staying close to home, which obviously could stress potentially other parts of that defense. Now, another guy playing down in the box is Marlowe Wax. Let's talk a little bit about Marlowe. Marlowe, 6 foot, 230 pounds, out of the state of Maryland. Kind of an underrated guy, an 83 3-star when he came out in the class of 2020, went to Mount St. Joseph down in Baltimore. Came out initially as a running back, and other than Syracuse and Pitt, did not have a lot of P5 looks. Had some interest from Marshall and ECU. Sorry about that. But let's talk about this year. Second on the team in tackles at 53. Does have a pick and 3 forced fumbles. Brian, I say linebacker in a 3-3-5 stack. We've already talked about the Rover, so he's definitely not playing that position, which also some people consider linebacker in a 3-3-5 stack. Where is he playing?
Yeah, he's that Mike. Some also call it Jack. Just kind of depends on the system. Mike linebacker, a lot of responsibilities with that position. Heavy blitz usage from all angles. They'll move him around. They'll shuffle him around. So he's coming off the edge. He's coming up the middle. A gap, B gap, C gap, whatever gap the offense has, he's going to be used in those on the blitz game. He's great in pursuit, really good at shooting gaps and occasionally getting some tackles for loss. But I'd say the only thing that I'd say we could maybe take advantage of is that he can get blocked when he's running downhill against the run. He's not very good at shedding blockers and taking on those bigger players head on. He much would rather run at an angle, pursue, shoot a gap, something like that, kind of to make that play. So that might be where we can take some advantage.
All righty. Shelton, any sort of deeper stats with Mr. Wax?
He is the highest graded highest graded linebacker for Syracuse. Really good tackler. Talking about the stop stat, he's got 32 stops on the season, which is second in the entire ACC. So very big run stuffing guy.
All righty. I find it interesting, Brian, what you talk about easily getting blocked when he gets downhill against the run. That'll be more interesting in how they line him up. Do they continue to move him like they have all season? Because especially if we get some of our run game going, if we can engage him, could take out one of their best tacklers. All right, last piece we're going to go. We're staying up front for the last guy as well, and I want to talk about Kevon Darden. And Kevon Darden, go to 247, you won't find a page on him. He was a walk-on. Who is now a defensive tackle there. He's only 5'11", about 275 pounds. And so he's not that big of a guy when you hear defensive line because he does play defensive tackle. And so far this year, he does have 3 sacks, 14 total tackles with a forced fumble. What I don't like hearing is every single guy at multiple levels has a forced fumble. Not a fan of that. Brian, looking at the tape, I know you kind of an interesting guy to watch from a tape perspective on all the things they do with him.
Yeah, as you said, former walk-on. They play him at that shade nose. Sometimes he's head up, sometimes he's in the shade, but they'll also kind of line him up in different spots whenever they mix up those fronts. So he'll be in a 3 technique, he'll be in a 4-eye, he'll be in a 4 technique. It just kind of really depends on how they're attacking and how they're mixing up their fronts. But his size is interesting for a nose, even in a 3-3 stack nose, because he is a very small small player. He's 5'11", 275. That's about 30 pounds and at least a couple inches shorter and lighter than you normally see a nose at the starting end. That height probably not as big of an issue as the weight, but he actually does a pretty good job of eating blockers despite that size. And he slants pretty quick, so he's a guy that, for what he lacks in size, makes up with in quickness. So he gets some occasional tackles for loss opportunities in that regard.
Sheldon, anything on him?
No, I just got one on Anwar Sparrow, who was their one of their highest graded D linemen. So he was
Go ahead.
Yeah, so he was third in the ACC overall, big on the run defense. I can look up the numbers, but basically he's their top run stuffing guy. Sparrow is on that D front.
All righty, so we got Sparrow as their big run stuffer defensive line. You got Darden as a small, undersized defensive tackle that they like to do a lot of things with. So it's going to be interesting to see how we handle this. And I'm going to flip it here, and we're going to go next to the Hokie Keys. And I'm going to start with you, Brian. What do you think is your biggest key for this game?
Biggest key for this game to me is going to be the offense needs to stay ahead of the sticks. I think if we can get into those second and manageable, third and manageable situations, control the time of possession, because that's what they're going to try to do to us. If we can control the time of possession and make them have to get away from what they feel they do best, which is running the football both with Schrader and with their running backs. If we can do that, I think that puts us in a better spot long term in that game. So if we can stay ahead of the sticks, that'll be a good way to control that time of possession and put them in difficult situations when they're on offense.
All right, Sean, what about you?
Yeah, for me, it's all about contain. They got to contain the quarterback Schrader. And I think when you look at this offense overall, not to be disparaging of any of their players, but there just really aren't a ton of individual standouts outside of Schrader. And really, their whole offense is just predicated on him getting out in space and making plays. And so if you take away that scramble game, that run game, I mean, they don't have a ton left. And they've struggled a lot on early downs this season, like, one of the worst in the country on first and second down. So you put them in third and long, it's not going to go particularly well for them, but you still got to make sure that you contain the quarterback. So keeping Schrader in check is definitely the biggest key for winning this ball game.
Yep, I'm with what you said there, and it's attack responsibly, because what you just said even more, Shelton, goes back to what my thought was. They're not good on first and second down. If you can attack them, get them behind the sticks where they can't just run him up the middle, it's going to put them in dire situations. And again, you're talking about the 100th rated, team sacks allowed, regardless what the grades say, they give up those sacks. And then you've got APR, who's number 6 in the country. The Hokies, I believe, are in the top 40 in the country in sacks, in team sacks. So there's that one piece. Attack, but attack responsibly. Make sure you don't give him running lanes. So a lot of integrity there. I'm going to do one on offense here since Tally isn't. Take what the defense gives you. They're a pretty balanced defense. They do give up more passing than they do rushing, but take what they give you. Wake Forest decided to load the box, and Kyron Drones sliced and diced them all night. So take whatever they give you. If they want to try to play more coverage, run the ball. I think we can run against this team. So there that is. Now, before we get into our prediction and then a quick note about big screeners this week, this segment is presented by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is a daily fantasy app where you can make entries based on player projected outcomes. And Brian, did you hit the 2 you had last week?
I did not.
What you had.
I did
not. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. Prize Picks will match up any deposit up to $100 when you sign up with the code BCPicks. It's right there. Brian's about to pull it up. The reason he's not pulling it up because go ahead, pull it up. We don't have anything left yet. We have 2 games we know we're going to pick. We've got to find some other games. But when we started,
we don't have a line yet.
We don't have a line.
Until we get the line. We can't.
Line started coming out about 6:00.
Yep.
We have dinner. Sheldon was working. Brian had things going on. Tally's away. You will get this in a tweet between now and sometime Thursday with our picks. So, again, there's a QR code if you need it. Let's go ahead and make the Hokie predictions. And I'm going to start off on behalf of Jonathan Talley. Got a text from him here. 27-17. He is staying on the Hokie bandwagon and going 27-17 Hokies. Sheldon, what do you feel on this game?
Yeah, I'm going to go Hokies by 4. I think this is a game where how do I phrase this? My brain says VT, even though there's part of my gut that says it's going to be a letdown loss. But I will say, this is probably the first game in a while where I've been, genuinely pumped for it, because I think you've got a huge opportunity. You've got Syracuse coming in on Thursday night. You win this game, you go to 3-1 in the ACC, 4-4 overall. You're probably going to be projected to make a bowl game if you win this game. And I think it's going to get the fan base entirely back on your side. If you lose, now you're kind of back to oh, well, we might go 4-8, 5-7. So I think there's a lot riding on this game. I mean, I know it's it might seem like just a matchup between two mediocre ACC teams, and maybe it is, but this could be a huge confidence boosting win for VT. So regardless, they got to win this game, and so I got Hokies by 4.
Brian?
I've got the Hokies winning 27-20. I think this is going to be the win that, if they're not already, gets the fan base fully bought into what Pry is doing, and what the team is doing and the steps that we're taking going forward to build this program back up. I don't think that this is a monumental win if it happens, but what it proves is that you can go into a Thursday night game in prime time in your home stadium and beat a team that, at least on paper, is as good or better than you are.
There you go.
And I think that's an important hurdle to get over for this staff and this team, is going out there and taking care of the business consistently in those type of matchups. We've seen Wake Forest, we've seen Pitt. Those teams are probably in the bottom 3 or 4 of the ACC. Syracuse is more of a middle of the pack team. If we can show we can get a victory against them, I think that will boost the confidence of the team, boost the confidence of the fan base.
Yep. And I'm with y'all. I do think the Hokies win this game, and I'm going to go 30-21. I think the Hokies win comfortably. And it's I like what y'all said. This is that game that can springboard things for the fan base. Especially, it's like we saw the Pitt game. It's like, oh, okay. We hadn't beat Pitt like that in years. We hadn't beat Pitt by multiple scores in years. You go to the FSU game, you show 3 good quarters of football against one of the best teams in the country. And then you have another good game against Wake, where you do what you're supposed to do against a lesser team. And to y'all's point, I think a lot of people are on the side regardless what happens this year. I mean, we're 7 games in. We're already at 3 wins. Took 11 last year to get there. It also, what we were talking about, the issues that we're having, and I've said this a couple times, the issues we had last year, it literally lasted from game 4 to game 11, where there were issues starting with game 2 that roughly by game 5, things were starting to change, right? Some guys weren't seeing the field. Play calling was changed. And I think now this is a real test for not only for the whole staff, but for Brent Pry, the head coach, because you're feeling good after Wake. Can you get everybody grounded and say that means nothing unless you don't go out there and beat their asses Thursday night? It's going to be a packed house. It's going to be 7:30. It's going to be on ESPN. We're going to have about 3.5 million eyes on us. Go out there and do it. Show that we are on the way to being who we were.
Yeah, and this is that step forward. So Tally was talking about before Wake how important Wake was to keep a bowl on the plate, right? Wake kept the bowl on the plate. This is where you start putting yourself into that conversation, because it is a more middle of the road ACC team, because it is on Thursday night and it's a game that has a bunch of eyes on it. So this is where you take that next step.
Yep.
You had to get Wake behind you to even get to this point where this game matters and this game has some stakes attached to it. Now you're here. Go out there and handle the business.
There you go. Sheldon, anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I was saying, it's just this is a game where you feel like everyone's coming in hyped. It's Thursday night, and I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, but this is one of those games in Virginia Tech lore where you look back on it and say, "Man, what a classic Virginia Tech game to lose." So I just think I just think it's a big game, man. Like you just got to win this to get the fan base on your side. Like if you go into the Louisville week 4-4, 3-1, like I mean, you're feeling pretty good.
You
So
are.
it's just it's a big game.
Can I say this? You talked about the classic letdown game. Let this be the place where it re-goes the other way where it did for years, where Thursday nights was you
Yeah.
come in here and play on Thursday night, you're not going to win. You're not going to win this game. And on some of those Thursday nights, it was not only a win, it was a damn beatdown.
Right.
And can we peak that? Can we get through this thing of losing Thursday nights? Can we start going back the right way in what history tells us the way it should be? All right. Anything breaking in the last hour and 17?
Tally joined us live here.
Hey!
Hey, man. The links in Twitter. Jump on.
The links in Twitter, jump on. He's driving, I think. We missed you tonight, Tally. We know you'll be back next week, man. Maybe Tally will jump on, do a space on Wednesday night or something. Who knows? All right. Well, that is going to wrap up this episode of the Boundary Corner podcast, brought to you by Main Street Pharmacy in Blacksburg. I'm Curtis Wilson.
I'm Brian Siegler.
And I am Shelton Moss.
Visit our website, boundarycornervt.com, to listen to all of our episodes. See what we said years ago about Garrett Schrader. That'd be a good one, right? Because that was a long time ago.
I think he had only started like one game at that
One
point.
game then, and he freaking torched us for 45. Let's not talk about that. We also have the merchandise shop at Boundary Corner Store. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Subscribe on our YouTube, your favorite podcast source, including Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Podcasts. As always, we let our buddy Jason Long play us in, play us out. Visit him at jasonlongmusic.com, where you can link to all of his music, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, his Facebook and YouTube pages. Also, got his upcoming live performances on there as well. He keep those updated. Support him down in Roanoke. And as always, we thank y'all for listening, and let's go.
Hokies.
Peace.